Hello class, good morning. Uh, Welcome back again to our physics session. We are doing chapter number 3, force. In the last week, in the class we learnt about force, what is force, and different effects of force on like on bodies, isn't it? Yes. So we have learned about these changes in the last classes, isn't it? Then we also learned about stretch and what is squeezing. Yes, I gave you some examples in the last class. Today we'll be doing types of forces. So when we are learning about types of forces, there are basically two types of forces. Means you can categorize force in two types. One is contact force, you can see here on your book. Contact force. Other one is non-contact force. So basically there are two types of forces. There are contact force and non-contact force. So these are the two types of forces that we are going to learn here in this later half of the chapter. Alright, so today's topic would be contact force. Now as you see the word here, contact, means you are applying a force by actually coming in contact. Means the two bodies on which the forces are acting are actually in contact with each other. So you can underline this: a force which is applied on an object by another object which is in direct contact. See, the word that you must remember here is direct contact, means they are physically in touch with each other. With it, in it's termed as contact forces. For example, frictional force, muscular force, and mechanical force. So underline these three types of forces. These are the examples of non-contact force. So non-contact forces को examples they are frictional force. Number one is frictional force. Number two is muscular force, the force which are which are coming from our muscles are called muscular force. And the last one is your mechanical force. So these are the three types of non-contact force. So you can actually you can underline this entire paragraph, these 4 lines. You can underline. So now we know what is a contact force. A contact force is a force which is actually acting on one object by another object, which are actually in physical touch. Actually they are in contact with each other. Such kind of force is called contact force. All right. Okay, now let's go to the second page. In the second page, next page in your book, you will see the first one is your muscular force. You can number one it. Number one is contact under contact force is muscular force. Number two is frictional force. Number three is mechanical force. So these are the 3 different types of contact force. So what are they? Number one is muscular force. Number two is frictional force. Number 3 is mechanical force. So now you have to remember that these are the 3 types of contact forces. Let's begin with number one. Number one, muscular force. A force, please underline this, which is applied by the muscles of our living beings are known as muscular force. Muscular force is used in various daily activities such as walking, talking, eating, lifting load, etc. Isn't it? So the force which are actually applied by our muscles, or the force that we get by the use of our muscles, is called muscular force. The next one is frictional force. The force exerted by the surfaces in contact with each other in order to oppose the motion of a moving body is known as frictional force. Frictional force. Or you can also define this frictional force in a very simple word. What is, if the question comes, what is frictional force, means you can write opposing force. Opposing force is called frictional force. Now to whom it opposes? Opposes motion. So the force which opposes motion is called frictional force. That would be the another definition for frictional force. Now underline the examples. Examples: when we apply a force on the ground backward, the ground offers frictional force on the feet, which helps us to move ahead. So this is another example. So frictional force is acting on two bodies which are actually in contact with each other. So that's why we place frictional force under contact force. The third one is mechanical force. The force applied by a machine is known as mechanical force. So whenever you see that forces which are applied by machines are called mechanical force. A mechanical force involves contact with another object. For example, mechanical force is pushing of a door by someone. The person's hand makes direct contact with the door and applies the force. Alright, so whenever you see that the force that you are applying on the body, either it brings motion in a object, or okay, it deforms the object, then the energy possessed or the force, okay, which is bringing this change is called mechanical force. Alright, so now we'll learn them about them one by one. The first we are going to learn is about friction. Now when we throw a ball on a smooth ground, the ball rolls to some distance and then stops. If we stop pedaling a bicycle, it begins to slow down and soon it stops. So what makes the ball or the bicycle stop? So you have wondered that whenever you are kicking a ball on the ground, the ball rolls for a certain distance, but after completing a certain distance, what happens to the ball? The ball comes to rest. Isn't it? Slowly the speed of the ball will decrease and the ball will come to rest. Similarly, when you are cycling, okay, if you stop pedaling, what will happen? The cycle will now slowly reduce its speed घट्दै जान्छ अनि लास्टमा के हुन्छ? The cycle will stop, isn't it? Now why it is stopping? किन त cycle रोकिँदैछ? Because when an object, see, underline this, moves in a contact with another object, a force called frictional force or friction, this is the factor which slows down the motion of the object. So that is why the ball or the cycle stops. So whenever you are, okay, trying to slide one object on another, okay, what happens? It opposes the motion. So this force, okay, which opposes the motion is called frictional force. So here you have the another definition. When two surfaces slide over each other, the force which opposes the motion is called frictional force, or the force of friction, or just simply friction. So this is your first thing, contact force that we are learning in detail, that is friction, or we can call it as frictional force. All right, and then one more thing, contact force is there. It is called collision force. Here you can see in the fact zone. Okay, why do the bodies of vehicles collapse on collision? Okay, ठोकिँदाखेरि चाहिँ किन कुच्चिन्छ? That is our question. So collision is an interaction between two objects when they have made contact with each other. As in any interaction, a collision results in the force being applied to the two colliding objects. This applied force depends on the mass and speed of the colliding bodies, due to which the car, when they collide, collapses, kuchincha. So actually what happens when the car or something is in motion, okay, what happens? It has some energy stored in it. So when they collide, this energy actually does the work to have dent, kuchino, okay, or collapsing. Are you getting my point? So this collision force is also a contact force. यो चाहिँ तिमीले fourth force भन्दा हुन्छ. अघि हामीले तीनटा पढ्यो contact force, isn't it? Muscular force, frictional force, mechanical force. So number 4 मा चाहिँ के हुन्छ आउँदा रहेछ? Collision force. So you can also write that number 4th contact force is collision force. All right, so I hope you all understood what we learned today. If you have any doubts, you can always text me in the group. All right, so let us again recall that the things that we have learned today. Number first that we learned today is about contact force. Okay, we learned about types of forces. There are two types of forces. That was the first that I taught you today. They are contact force and non-contact force. Contact forces, those forces which are acting on two bodies, okay, which are physically in touch with each other or in contact with each other, is called contact force. Contact force can be divided into following groups. They are muscular force, frictional force, mechanical force, and we also learn the fourth kind of contact force, that is collision force. Okay, so we learned, and after this we learned about muscular force, the force which is applied by our muscles when we are doing some activities like walking, running, eating, singing, isn't it? Taking bath, fighting, isn't it? With your friends, okay, or playing cricket, football. These all are the activities which involves muscular force. Then comes frictional force. Whenever two bodies are sliding on each other or rolling on each other, okay, when a car is running on the road, the tire of the car rolls on the road, isn't it? So there is a contact between the tire of the car and the road. So the force acting between them is called frictional force. And frictional force always opposes motion. That's why it's also called as opposing force to the motion. Then we learned about mechanical force. Mechanical force is the force which is applied by machines. So whenever you see that the force acting on a body makes the body to come to motion or deforms it, change by shape, size, we call it as mechanical force. All right. Then we learned about friction. Okay. And lastly, we learned about collision force. Okay. So that's all for today. Now, after watching this clip, you will get your notes as usual. Okay, so copy those notes properly and learn them. All right, so that's all for today. Goodbye.